Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are jumping right into the exact mechanics of how a single band from Liverpool literally changed the history of recorded music. We're drawing our insights directly from Mauro's brilliant book, The Sound Revolution, to figure out how this massive cultural shift actually happened. Everyone always says the Beatles changed everything, right? But if you ask them how, most people can't really give you a straight answer. Well, today we're moving way past the cliches. No childhood stories, no talk about their haircuts. We are looking specifically at the records, the crazy decisions made in cramped little studios, and how they quietly rewrote the rules that pretty much every artist uses today. So the absolutely crucial point here is their secret engine. They treated every single limitation as a temporary wall to be attacked through experimentation. It's what we call the innovation loop. First, you hit a constraint. A real physical limit you just can't wish away. Then you experiment. You stubbornly refuse to accept that limit and you find a workaround. Finally, because your wild experiment works so remarkably well, it actually becomes the new standard. Keep an eye out for this pattern because it literally organizes their entire 7-year recording career.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the apprenticeship.
Think about their very first constraint. They had absolutely zero original material of their own. None. But Liverpool was a working seaport, so it was constantly bringing in these obscure American records. Because of this, they absorbed this omnivorous, borrowed toolbox. We're talking skiffle's accessibility, the driving backbeat of American rock and roll, the interlocking voices of close harmony groups, the sheer grit of R&B, and even the melodic sophistication of the old British music hall tradition. By pulling from all these different idioms instead of just one, they built a musical vocabulary that let them recombine sounds in ways the original creators never even imagined. And then there's Hamburg. We are talking thousands of hours playing these grueling, endless sets in really hostile German clubs. Club owners were demanding they play for 6, sometimes 8 hours straight, night after night. This wasn't some casual bedroom practice. It was pure survival. This brutal environment drilled a serious professional stamina into them. There's a massive difference between private practice and performance practice. The stage taught them how to recover from a mistake instantly, how to read a room, and how to hold a tempo when they were completely exhausted. So when they finally walked into an expensive recording studio, they weren't nervous amateurs at all. They were a road-hardened unit.
Moving on to Section 2, breaking the stage.
So right as they reach the absolute peak of global fame, they run smack into a massive new constraint: the screaming stadiums. The amplification technology of the 1960s simply couldn't match the sheer volume of the crowds. They literally couldn't hear themselves play. It made live performances musically meaningless. So they made an incredibly risky trade. They cashed in certain profit for uncertain art, retiring from touring completely in 1966 to focus solely on the studio. Which brings us to Section 3, the studio as an instrument. Now imagine this. They were facing primitive 4-track tape machines, literally just 4 tracks. To get around this massive constraint, they used a technique called reduction, or bouncing. They would mix 4 full tracks together down onto a single track on a second machine just to free up space. And because this process was completely irreversible, it forced immense discipline and absolute commitment to their sound. By actually creatively misusing this equipment, they turned desperate little tricks into permanent industry standards. For example, John Lennon absolutely hated singing his vocals twice, so their engineers actually invented artificial double tracking to delay the vocal automatically, creating this incredible swirling effect. They altered tape speeds for unearthly timbres, they wired heavy loudspeakers to act as bass microphones, and they even physically spliced together tape loops of reversed audio. But to pull off these impossible sounds, they relied heavily on their producer, George Martin. See, the band didn't read or write standard musical notation. They would just ask for wild, abstract things like, hey, make it sound like 1,000 monks chanting on a mountaintop. George Martin was the ultimate translator who figured out how to actually do that. He wasn't just a supervisor. He was a genuine creative co-author who used his classical literacy to bring their impressionistic feelings into technical reality. And you really have to appreciate the sheer art of the edit here. Take Strawberry Fields, for instance. They physically spliced 2 completely incompatible takes together. Lennon liked the beginning of a slower, dreamy take and the ending of a heavier, faster one that was actually in a totally different key. By slowing the faster tape down just enough, they matched the pitch and tempo, hiding the edit with nothing but a razor blade and some tape. At this point, the recording wasn't just documenting a live event anymore. The recording was the event.
Next up is Section 4, the total artwork.
This whole new approach completely destroyed the old singles plus filler model. They totally changed the container itself. By treating the album as a unified mood, sequenced with deliberate, obsessive care, they opened up space for quieter, much stranger songs that would have never ever survived as standard radio singles. By putting on the mask of a totally fictional band for Sgt. Pepper, they basically gave themselves permission to do whatever they wanted. They could blend music hall, avant-garde tape collages, and classical Indian music all onto one record. This conceptual framing device meant they no longer had to sound like the Beatles. They could be a circus act, a brass band, or a psychedelic ensemble. And they extended this total artwork right down to the packaging, insisting that the elaborate visual cover was just as much a part of the listener's experience as the vinyl disc inside. They essentially smuggled the avant-garde right through the front door, into the mainstream. They took really out-there ideas from rarefied electronic studios, things like slicing everyday sounds into tape collages, and complex Indian classical music, and they dropped them right into millions of suburban living rooms. They didn't just cross genre lines, they completely erased them. Now we arrive at Section 5, the long goodbye. Those final years were really this fascinating creative tug of war. On one hand, they were nostalgically trying to be a raw live band again, and on the other, they were fully embracing their identity as a polished studio collective. The Get Back sessions were such a struggle because, well, you simply can't unlearn what you know. They were trying to fake an innocence they just didn't possess anymore. But when they finally set that nostalgia aside for Abbey Road, they created a gleaming masterpiece, ending their incredible career by stitching orphaned song fragments into one continuous flowing suite. Finally, we reach Section 6, the legacy. From self-authorship to treating the studio as an instrument, all the way to absolute genre fluidity, they rewrote the rules so completely that we now live super comfortably inside their conclusions. Seriously, every teenager building a track on a laptop today is the distant heir of those sessions. They normalized bands writing their own songs, they turned the album into high art, made producers creative co-authors, and dissolved the walls between genres. And maybe the most important thing of all, they trained the audience to actually listen deeply. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself a question. When you hit a wall in your own work, do you stop? Or do you use that constraint as an invitation to invent a brand new standard? See, the Beatles were definitely not the most technically gifted musicians of their generation. What made them truly revolutionary was their disposition. They flat out refused to treat a limit as the end of the matter. The specific techniques they invented are just history now, but that attitude, turning a closed door into an invitation, that is permanent. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I really hope this changes how you look at the walls in your own life.